Did you know the Great Pyramid is aligned so perfectly with true north that even modern architects are baffled? So do you really think humans built it? In this video you'll uncover secrets hidden deep inside its silent chambers, voids no one can explain, and giant sarcophagi carved with impossible precision. But beyond stone and math, imagine the ancient beliefs, a god torn apart and brought back to life, a scarab guiding the sun through the stars, and a soul's journey that might just be the oldest story of hope and resurrection. So lie back, breathe in the dust of millennia, and let the ancient echoes carry you deeper into mysteries too strange for history books. You blink slowly beneath the pyramid's gaze, as if its stones are watching you back. The air isn't just dry, it's still, too still, almost like the structure itself is holding its breath. And why not? It has every reason to be smug, because out of all the buildings in human history, this one somehow manages to align itself more perfectly with true north than any structure built since. Not kind of close, not good for 2500 BCE. We're talking within 3/60ths of a degree. That's more accurate than the Paris Observatory, better than your iPhone's compass on a good day. And here's the rub, this precision didn't happen by accident. No ancient builder woke up one morning, rolled out of bed, guessed north, and happened to align a 6 million ton monument more precisely than modern cities. It's almost like someone or something knew exactly what they were doing. But that's uncomfortable, isn't it? Because the moment you accept that, you have to start asking how. No magnetic compasses, no satellites, no laser levels, just the stars, and a maddening level of mathematical obsession, or perhaps insight. Now your brain might be whispering they probably used shadows or sticks, maybe the stars. Sure, plausible. Until you remember that Earth wobbles. It precesses like a lazy top over thousands of years, which means the alignment to true north wouldn't have been this accurate unless it was aligned during a very specific celestial window. Some researchers suggest the alignment might have even been more precise when originally constructed. The Earth moved, the pyramid didn't. Think about that. They knew where true north was before true north was quite where it is now. You take a step forward, and the sand crunches beneath your feet like soft static. A breeze brushes your cheek, the kind that feels more like memory than wind. The pyramid looms, smug in its silence, and you begin to suspect that this was never just a building. It was a message, or a warning, or perhaps a map, one that starts with orientation. Because if the ancients could tell you exactly where true north was without modern tools, what else could they measure? What else could they encode? What else did they know that we forgot? That silence, it won't last. It's not just where the pyramid points, it's where it is. You shuffle a few steps back, tilting your head as if that'll help you grasp the planetary absurdity of its placement. Because in the growing twilight of your understanding, one fact flickers like a stubborn flame. The Great Pyramid of Giza is located at the literal center of Earth's landmass. Now wait, center of what now? Yes, you heard right. Imagine drawing a great circle around the globe, slicing through the pyramid's cardinal and ordinal lines, north, south, east, west, and the diagonals in between. If you trace these lines outward, they intersect more landmass than from any other point on the surface of the Earth. It's not just central, it's absurdly, poetically central. Not center by luck, not center by imperial decree, but center by design. You try to remember your high school geography teacher's lectures, but nothing comes close to this level of cartographic trolling, because here you are, standing on a monument older than the Bible, placed with such cold mathematical arrogance that even GPS satellites would get a little insecure. You squint at the horizon, not expecting answers, but the pyramid just sits there, mute as always. And you realize something. The closer you get to understanding it, the more it smirks at your curiosity. That's the worst part. It knows something about oceans and tectonic plates, about symmetry and land distribution, about the Earth itself. And it's not just aligned to Earth, it belongs to it. Which brings us to a terrifying possibility. What if this structure wasn't built with only desert real estate in mind? What if its placement was selected not by pharaohs, but by someone or something with a planetary perspective? You know, the kind of perspective you get from low Earth orbit, or say a starship window. But let's dial it back a bit. The mainstream answer. Probably coincidence. The same way it's coincidence that Stonehenge aligns with solstices, or that Machu Picchu traces constellations. One coincidence is charming. 100 start to look like a cover-up. Historians still argue whether this placement was an intentional act of sacred geography or just a lucky fluke. Some claim the ancients were tuned into an earth-spirit harmony we've long forgotten, aligning monuments not just for symbolic value, but to mirror the cosmic layout of life itself. Others suggest it's just the largest flat space near the Nile. And you, standing in the dust, can't decide what's more disturbing, the idea that it wasn't planned, or that it was. You crouch and let your hand drag across the warm stone base of the pyramid. It hums, not audibly, but like an echo in your bones. Something about this spot, this precise where, feels like it matters, as if you've found the world's original "You Are Here" sticker. No wonder every conspiracy theorist, alien enthusiast, and sacred geometry nerd ends up here eventually. This isn't just a starting point, it's the origin of points. And maybe, just maybe, this was always meant to be more than a monument. It was meant to be a coordinate. And now that you're standing on it, well, you've already been measured. Your fingers linger on the stone, and you imagine a chisel in hand, the sun blistering your back, the pharaoh breathing down your neck. Except there's a problem. Even if you had a millennium, a supercomputer, and the patience of a saint, you wouldn't be able to recreate this monument, because it's not just big, it's calculated. And not in feet or meters. Oh no, this thing speaks cubits, and cubits are where the madness begins. A cubit, you learn, is an ancient Egyptian unit of measure, supposedly the length from the pharaoh's elbow to his middle fingertip, which is about as scientific as measuring with spaghetti. But dig deeper, and the story shifts from quaint to unnerving, because the Great Pyramid's builders didn't just use cubits, they used them like they were divine instruments. And here's the kicker, a pyramid cubit is roughly 0.63566 meters long. Now take the polar diameter of Earth, the distance from the North Pole to the South, and divide it by 25 million. What do you get? Yep, that cubit. You sit with that for a second. The cubit is 105 millionth of Earth's polar diameter. Who does that? Not Stone Age sun worshippers. Not reed-counting bureaucrats. That's the kind of math that requires understanding the size of the planet. You know, the kind of info you might get from orbiting it a few times. Historians still argue whether this was a lucky fluke, a numerological accident, or ancient intuition elevated to genius. But let's be honest, if your tape measure starts referencing planetary metrics down to the decimal, maybe you're not just building a tomb, maybe you're building a machine. Because here's where things spiral into cosmic absurdity. The pyramid's base length at its socket corners is exactly 365.24 cubits, not 365, not 366, but 365. Sound familiar? That's the number of days in a solar year, and not the ancient Egyptian year, the modern Gregorian year, leap day included. So let's just recap. A pyramid supposedly built by Bronze Age stonemasons not only knows the shape of the Earth, but encodes its circumference and calendar into its very bones. And you're supposed to believe they did this with rope, mud, and a really good sense of direction. You scoff out loud, maybe too loudly, and the pyramid doesn't flinch. It's heard all this before. It's been accused of being a calendar, a clock, a map, a monument, a machine, even a prophecy, but its silence remains constant. And the cubit, that sacred sliver of cosmic measurement, it's still mocking you from the limestone. And here's the part no one wants to say out loud. What if the cubit wasn't invented by the Egyptians? What if it was given to them, a gift from the gods? Or at least from some civilization so advanced they could hand out planetary tape measures, like party favors. You pace slowly around the base, mind spinning. Were the Egyptians brilliant? Absolutely. But was their brilliance entirely their own? That part's murkier. Some believe they inherited knowledge from a lost civilization. Atlantis, Lemuria, the works. Others whisper of Sumerian stargazers, or even older Neolithic nomads who wandered with cosmic insight etched into their bones. But there's a third group, the ones who never make it into mainstream documentaries. They don't talk about Atlantis, they talk about Sirius, about Orion, about the stars, and they claim the cubit was engineered elsewhere, that its proportions reflect not just Earth, but the architecture of the universe. A stretch, maybe, but then again, so is carving the solar year into rock, using a unit based on planetary girth. You glance back at the pyramid's silhouette against the bleeding sky. It's quiet, too quiet, as if it's waiting for you to ask the next question, not just how they measured, but why. Why would anyone embed such obsessive astronomical detail into a tomb? Why would they carve planetary constants into stone, unless the stone was meant to last longer than memory itself? The cubit doesn't just measure stone, it measures intention. And suddenly, you understand. This wasn't just a monument to a king. It was a whisper to the future, etched in planetary code, cubit by unnerving cubit. Section 5. You stand still, heartbeat syncing with the hush of ancient stones. The desert stretches around you, timeless, but something about this spot feels contemporary, because now we're about to talk speed. Not chariots, not solar boats. We're talking light. Yes, that speed of light. The universal constant, the unfathomable 299,792, 458 meters per second. What does that have to do with the Great Pyramid? Well, you might want to sit down for this one. Punch in the pyramid's coordinates, 29.9792458 degrees N into your GPS. Then try not to spill your tea when you realize it's the exact same sequence as the speed of light in meters per second. Go ahead, do the math. We'll wait. Done. Okay, breathe. Coincidence. That's the party line. Just like how the pyramid accidentally matches the curvature of the Earth. Just like how it incidentally encoded the solar calendar using cubits. But at some point, coincidence begins to smell more like cover-up, because here you are, standing on a prehistoric structure that casually shares its address with the most significant speed in the universe, and we're told it's just a fluke. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians even understood the metric system. Spoiler, they didn't. It wasn't invented until the 18th century, which makes the correlation even weirder, because how does a coordinate measured in modern meters correspond so perfectly to a cosmic speed discovered thousands of years after the pyramid was built? One camp says it's retrofitting, fancy math tricks played in reverse. Find any number you like, if you look hard enough, they say. And maybe that's true. But then again, this number isn't buried in some obscure back wall. It's the coordinate of the front door. The literal location. If someone did retrofit it, why this number? Why light? You step back, gazing up at the pyramid's gleaming flank. Its once polished limestone casing would have shone like a beacon, visible from space, reflecting sunlight by day, perhaps starlight by night, perhaps, just perhaps, signaling. The idea creeps over you like cold mist. What if this wasn't just a passive structure? What if it was broadcasting? Imagine you're a traveler, an actual one, crossing interstellar space, looking for signs of intelligent life. What might you recognize? Fire, language, or maybe a beacon, precisely aligned with true north, perfectly centered on Earth's landmass, calibrated in sacred proportions, and blinking out your own speed. Because here's where things get deliciously uncomfortable. Light speed isn't just a number, it's a fundamental constant, the cosmic speed limit, the backbone of relativity, the law that bends space and time itself. And here it is etched, however subtly, into the geography of ancient limestone. You press your palm to the pyramid's wall and wonder who put that number there and why. Maybe the pyramid isn't just recording information. Maybe it's safeguarding it, preserving knowledge in stone, because the ancients knew what the internet would eventually teach us. Data gets lost, USB sticks fail, cloud drives evaporate, but a 6 million ton monument, that's long-term storage. And let's not forget the poetic absurdity. A civilization that supposedly lacked iron tools and wheels just so happened to encode the cosmic speed limit using units of measurement they didn't know existed at a site they placed more precisely than modern man could manage today. Sure, totally normal. You hear a whisper, maybe the wind, maybe your own doubt, reminding you to be cautious, that drawing connections between ancient coordinates and modern science is a minefield of confirmation bias. And that's true. But it's also true that you're standing on a 4,500-year-old structure that keeps behaving like an interstellar breadcrumb. Historians still argue whether this alignment was an accident or a fluke of our decimal-hungry minds. Yet none can explain why so many anomalies cluster around this one single structure, why it's the only surviving wonder, why it continues to provoke both awe and denial. You step back, dusting your hands. The sun has dipped low, painting the pyramid in burning gold. You feel the irony deep in your bones, the speed of light, a force that defines now, etched into a relic from then. And suddenly, the pyramid isn't just a monument anymore. It's a lighthouse, a cosmic timestamp, a line of code waiting to be read. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't built for us. Maybe it was built by someone who understood what we would one day need to know. The wind picks up just a little, curling around the pyramid's edges, like it's trying to listen. You're not surprised anymore. You expect the pyramid to answer in numbers, in shadows, in perfectly inconvenient truths. And here comes another one. Because the Great Pyramid doesn't just stand on Earth, it mimics it, it mirrors it. Some might even say it models it. Let's go back to cubits. Take the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid, each side measuring approximately 230.4 meters. Multiply by 4, and you get a perimeter of roughly 921.6 meters. Now hold that number, because this is where things get geometrically ridiculous. If you scale that measurement up, if you factor it as a model, you start seeing echoes of Earth's actual size. That perimeter corresponds to a scale of the Earth's equatorial circumference. Likewise, the height of the pyramid, originally around 146.6 meters, scaled similarly, reflects the distance from Earth's equator to the North Pole. You don't need to be an architect to know this isn't normal behavior for a tomb. Some researchers, quietly of course, have begun calling the Great Pyramid the scale model of the Northern Hemisphere. Not metaphorically, mathematically. They claim its proportions encode pi and phi, as well as Earth's geodetic curvature. That if you draw a circle with the pyramid's height as the radius and compare it to the base perimeter, you nearly match the value of 2 phi. That's not a theory, that's math. Stubborn, inconvenient math. So you do the math, and it matches. You try to laugh, but it's a dry chuckle now. No mirth. Just awe spiced with mild existential dread. Because here's the part that makes your skull itch. If this pyramid is a model of Earth, who the hell builds a stone model of a planet unless they understand the planet? Historians still argue whether these proportions were intentional or just an architectural coincidence, the historical equivalent of shrugging and changing the subject. But how many coincidences does it take before it becomes a message? 1, 2, or maybe 6 million tons of limestone geometry, whispering in the language of cartographers and gods. You circle around the base again, letting your eyes follow the angle of its slope. It's not a smooth rise. This isn't a ziggurat or a temple. It's a triangle of defiance. A triangle whose slope reflects the ratio of a circle to its diameter, which, you guessed it, suggests pi. And you ask yourself, who taught ancient stonemasons to encode transcendental numbers into architecture? Who told them that the earth could be modeled, and why would they do it? Because that's the real question, isn't it? Not how, but why. You could almost accept that some ancient savant stumbled across P by carving rocks for 30 years. But this isn't the math of accidents. This is the math of purpose. A message meant not for gods, but for those with calculators. Maybe the pyramid was trying to say, we understood more than you think. Or maybe it's more cryptic. When you rediscover these numbers, you'll be ready for the rest. And now you're wondering, is there a rest? Another layer? Another clue? Some claim the pyramid also maps the precession of the equinoxes, the movement of the stars over 26,000 years, that its chambers represent earth, air, fire, water, and the void, that it functions as a celestial clock, counting down something we've already missed. You don't know. Nobody does. But one thing is clear, this was never just about a dead king and some buried gold. You pause at one corner, placing your hand on the socket stone. The limestone is warm from the sun, but you could swear there's something humming beneath the surface. You press harder, almost expecting it to click open like a secret door. Nothing happens, of course, but it's a strange kind of nothing, a knowing kind. Because this pyramid, it doesn't answer, it doesn't argue, it just waits, like it knows you'll be back, or that someone will, someone ready to finish the puzzle. And just when you think you've seen it all, the light shifts slightly, just a degree or two, and the shadow along its face changes shape. Not a lot, just enough. And you realize, maybe it's not a model of Earth. Maybe it's a model of something else, something bigger, something we don't even have a name for yet. But that can wait until morning. Night blankets the plateau, and the pyramid doesn't vanish, it sharpens. You never noticed how its edges catch moonlight like blades, or how its shadow stretches unnaturally long, like it's reaching for something just out of sight. With the sun gone, it's as if the pyramid finally exhales. It belongs to the stars now. And you realize that's probably the point, because this isn't just a monument to Earth. It's a mirror to the sky. You lie back on the cooling stone, and there they are, Orion's belt, twinkling smugly above the horizon. 3 stars, unevenly spaced, just like the 3 pyramids at Giza. You've heard the theory, of course, how the pyramids are aligned to those celestial bodies. But what you didn't realize until now is how precisely this imitation plays out. The Great Pyramid corresponds to Alnitak, the brightest star. The middle pyramid, Khafre, matches Alnilam, and the smallest, Menkaure, trails behind, just like Mentaka. Their spacing, angle, even their size all match the stars with uncanny fidelity. And it's not a modern comparison. The theory dates back decades, and it hasn't been comfortably debunked. Historians still argue whether the pyramids were deliberately aligned to Orion's belt, or whether it's another case of cosmic coincidence. But if it was deliberate, the implications are vast, because it means the builders weren't just looking down, they were looking up, way up. The Orion correlation theory proposes that the ancient Egyptians believed the god Osiris resided in that constellation, and that aligning the pyramids to it wasn't just symbolic, it was functional, a literal ladder to the stars, a pathway for the soul of the pharaoh to ascend and reunite with the divine. You laugh softly. It's poetic, in a way that only obsessive math, wrapped in myth, can be. But it gets weirder. The shafts inside the Great Pyramid, those narrow, impossible little tunnels, don't just point randomly. Some align with Orion, others with Sirius. Not yesterday, not today, but 4,500 years ago, at the exact positions those stars held in the sky back then. Who tracks stellar drift like that without telescopes? Maybe they had some ancient version of a sky map. Or maybe they had something better. Maybe they had memory. And while we're cataloguing impossibilities, let's not forget the pyramid's precise latitude aligns with a point where the land mass density of Earth balances, or how its base sides correspond to golden ratios, the sacred geometry of life itself, or how its internal angles mirror the curvature of light. You lie there, letting the wind graze your ears like a forgotten lullaby. The stars wheel slowly overhead, ancient and new all at once. And you wonder, was this alignment a love letter to the cosmos, a kind of architectural confession that Earth once remembered its place among the stars? Because here's the haunting idea. What if the pyramid is a conversation, not just with the Earth, but with space, with whatever watches from above, a monument that whispers upward, "We know you're out there." The notion might seem absurd, but you've already accepted stranger things tonight, and as your eyes drift across Orion and its mirrored twins of stone, you feel something primal stir in your chest. Not fear, not awe, something lonelier. Because if the ancient Egyptians built this alignment on purpose, they weren't just engineers, they were communicators, translators, stargazers who left us a coded message in geometry and granite. And maybe the question isn't why they aligned their tombs to the stars. Maybe it's why we stopped. It's not just what the stars see, it's what's buried beneath them. You rise slowly, bones aching from the stone's chill, and begin the short walk toward the other end of the Giza Plateau. The wind hums, low and dry, as though warning you you're about to descend, and you are. Because pyramids aren't the only structures Egypt built to touch eternity. Some weren't built to rise at all. They were built to hide. Saqqara, the step of the dead. If Giza was for kings, Saqqara was for gods pretending to be men. And it's here you find the tomb of King Teti, not much to look at above ground, a mound of collapsed stone, sun-bleached and unimpressive. But underneath, that's where things get disturbing. You lower yourself into the shaft, past loose sand and suspiciously symmetrical stone. The air cools as you descend. Torchlight flickers against ancient walls, and then you see them, the pyramid texts. Carved into limestone like cosmic graffiti, they're the oldest religious writings ever discovered. Spells, incantations, instructions. At first glance they read like spiritual post-it notes. Don't forget to wear your crown in the afterlife. Tell Ra you're important. Take the boat, not the stairs. But it doesn't take long for the tone to shift. These aren't poems, they're coordinates. Because what they describe isn't some fuzzy vision of fluffy clouds and lyres. They talk about stairways of iron, about doors in the sky, about the imperishable ones, the undying stars beyond our solar wheel. And most disturbingly, they talk about travel. Literal, mechanical, celestial travel. Historians still argue whether the pyramid texts were metaphorical, allegorical, or just the pharaoh's anxious dream journal. But that doesn't explain the specificity. That doesn't explain why the language feels like a technical manual hidden inside a prayer book. You will fly on the iron wings of the falcon. You will ascend the ladder of fire. The gate will open for you. If you recite the names of the watchers. If that sounds like religion to you, it's a strange one. If it sounds like a launch sequence, well, you're not alone. Some fringe theorists, of course they're fringe, suggest these texts were more than spiritual guidance. They were protocols, instructions for how to activate something, not just rituals for the soul's journey, but operational procedures for a process, a gateway, a system, and maybe, just maybe, a machine. You pause at one of the glyphs, a symbol for a door flanked by stars. It doesn't look like metaphor. It looks like a diagram, like a blueprint, too sacred to be called what it really is. But even if you wanted to dismiss all that as ancient sci-fi, there's still a question the skeptics haven't answered. Why does nearly every ancient Egyptian burial chamber obsess over direct, not just east for the sunrise type stuff, We're talking narrow shafts drilled through hundreds of tons of stone at precise angles, many of which point directly at significant stars. Orion, Sirius, the North Star, thousands of years ago, not today. That's crucial. It means they weren't just aligning for symmetry or style, they were targeting. And if the destination is the stars, the pyramid texts are the boarding pass. Over and over they speak of becoming a star, of transforming, ascending, merging with Osiris, the god of resurrection, also curiously associated with the Orion constellation. Coincidence again? Sure, if you're still into that sort of thing. But you're not, are you? Not really. You look around at the cramped chamber, the hieroglyphs wrapping you like circuitry. You feel less like a tourist, more like a wire inside some ancient device. The texts aren't static. They flow, they lead, and the deeper you read, the more it feels like someone was trying to preserve not just their body, but their momentum, their escape velocity. And here's the final twist. These texts weren't for everyone. They were reserved, specific, customized to each king. Why? Because each pharaoh, it seems, had a different path, a different route through the stars. That's not religion. That's flight navigation. So you step back into the hallway, the air tighter now, as if the pyramid is holding its secrets, just a little closer. You feel it in your bones, the truth hovering just out of reach. Maybe you can't read ancient Egyptian, but your instincts are screaming something universal. This wasn't about death. It was about departure. You emerge from Teti's tomb, as if waking from a dream, laced with wires and wings. The desert sky feels too wide now, as if you've been somewhere tighter, stranger, more intelligent. Your boots crunch over sand, still echoing, with whispers of starlit stairways and doorways carved into the void. You think, just for a moment, that the sand itself remembers, and it isn't done with you yet. Just a few miles from the sleepy pyramid ruins of Teti lies something far louder, not in sound, but in scale, the Serapeum of Saqqara. Now this is a place that doesn't whisper. It thunders, even underground. You descend once again, deeper this time, beneath the earth, beneath the explanations. The air thickens, the passage narrows, and then you see them. No pyramids here, no grand staircases to the heavens, just a series of massive stone sarcophagi, huge, monolithic, and weirdly empty. Each box is the size of a small garage. Some are 13 feet long, 10 feet tall, and weigh 70 tons. Their lids, 30 more tons, polished with a precision that modern engineers admit is difficult even today. Forget tombs. These things are vaults. Historians still argue whether these boxes were intended to house sacred Apis bulls, celestial cattle tied to Osiris. But only one sarcophagus ever held remains, just one. And those, a strange mess of fragmented bones and black bitumen, not exactly the neat, reverent burials you'd expect for animals of divine status. So what were these colossal containers really for? Some say they were symbolic, others say they were stockpiles of ritual significance. A few even claim they were vibrational chambers, tools in a forgotten sound technology. But the more time you spend down here, the more it feels like you're standing inside a server farm built in a fever dream, because this place hums, not literally, but spiritually, architecturally. You feel like information was stored here, not blood, not bone, something more volatile. Let's take a moment to talk construction. These granite boxes were carved out of single blocks, some of which came from Aswan 500 miles south. That's not just dedication, that's obsession, or panic, because you don't move 100-ton blocks unless whatever you're building needs to survive everything. Fire, flood, time, or maybe even betrayal. The corners are perfect 90-degree angles. The lids are mirror smooth. You could measure reflections in them. Ancient engineers without diamond drills or lasers managed this supposedly with copper chisels and sand. You almost feel bad for modern skeptics, forced to defend that narrative. It's like claiming someone painted the Sistine Chapel with a toothbrush and a dream. You circle one of the boxes, trailing your fingers along its side. It doesn't feel like a coffin. It feels like containment, sealing, locking something in, not gently laying something to rest. You half expect a warning label, do not open unless you want the stars to scream. Of course, no such label exists, just strange inscriptions. One glyph here, a symbol there, but many are blank, smooth, almost sterile, as if deliberately scrubbed of meaning, or waiting for it. Some fringe theorists have proposed that the boxes weren't coffins at all, but machines, power sources, energy regulators, or storage units for something non-corporeal, consciousness, frequency, maybe even souls, if you're feeling poetic. The Egyptians didn't see death as an end, after all. They saw it as movement, transfer, transformation. And what better vessel for transformation than a perfectly sealed, mathematically precise stone sarcophagus buried beneath sacred earth? That's not burial, that's insulation. You turn a corner and stop. One of the boxes is cracked open, lid pushed just slightly ajar. Enough to tempt, enough to terrify. You don't step closer. You don't want to look inside. Not because you think there's a body, but because you suspect there isn't. The space inside might be empty, but it doesn't feel that way. It feels used, charged, like it held something once. Something with weight, but not mass. A memory, maybe, a map, or a piece of something even bigger. And here's where it gets worse. This isn't the only place like this. Across Egypt, across the world even, we find these oversized containers, too big for bodies, too silent to be mere stone. They pop up in valleys, mountains, temples, even jungles, not connected by culture, but by design. What kind of global architecture has no face but the same geometry, no inscription but the same echo? Maybe a species that once shared something more than land. Maybe a message meant for those who could piece together the puzzle centuries later, in an age of lost sleep and glowing screens. You step away from the cracked lid, suddenly aware of how alone you are, not in danger, just watched or measured. And as you leave the Serapeum, you feel lighter, not in spirit, but in data, as if you've been scanned, logged. You don't know what the boxes were meant to store. You only know they're not empty. Not really. The sun is climbing again, high enough now to cast long blue shadows from every sandstone edge. You're back above ground, lungs grateful for air that doesn't weigh like memory, but your mind, still heavy, drags you toward one last shape on the horizon, a temple, quiet and ruined, yet whispering stories far louder than its collapsed pillars suggest. This is Abydos. It doesn't carry the fame of Giza or the mystery of Saqqara, but it may hold something rarer, a myth that refuses to behave. Abydos was sacred to Osiris, the original god-king, the mythological ruler said to have taught humanity agriculture, laws, even architecture. And then, like any dramatic divine figure worth worshipping, he was murdered, torn apart by his jealous brother Set, scattered across Egypt like grotesque puzzle pieces. But Isis, his devoted sister-wife, ancient deities, were nothing if not complicated. Search the land, gathering each piece. She finds 13. She reassembles him, revives him, but one part is missing. His, well, let's just say the part ancient texts tastefully refer to as the creative scepter. Isis fashions a replacement with magic, or maybe with technology. Historians still argue whether this myth is metaphor, morality tale, or mystical surgery manual. But here's what doesn't sit quietly: the Djed pillar. This strange symbol appears again and again in Egyptian temples, especially at Abydos, 4 horizontal bars stacked atop a vertical shaft. Osiris's spine, they say, a symbol of stability, power, resurrection. But look closely, and modern eyes begin to twitch. Because the gear doesn't just look like a stylized vertebrae column. It looks like a coil, a Tesla coil, a battery, a transmission tower. It shows up in carvings where Isis holds it, almost like she's adjusting it, plugging it in. In one panel, her hand sinks into Osiris's back, directly into the D-jet, not beside it, not near it, inside it. It's not anatomy, it's interface. You sit on a crumbling ledge and try to picture it, not the myth, the moment. What if Osiris wasn't biological at all? What if he was mechanical? It's a thought so outrageous it almost resets your brain, but it won't leave. Because if Osiris was a machine, a robot, even, then the myth of his dismemberment and resurrection takes on a whole new tone, less tragedy, more blueprint, less divine drama, more maintenance manual. And suddenly Isis isn't just a goddess, she's a technician, a resurrection engineer. You laugh softly, then stop, because maybe it's not funny. Across Abydos, carvings depict Osiris, not as a limber young hero, but as a pillar, upright and featureless, his arms crossed, his feet fused, as if his body was the jade, as if resurrection didn't restore his human form, but reactivated his function. Maybe the myth wasn't meant to comfort the grieving. Maybe it was meant to warn the inheritors. And here's the kicker. No one agrees on what the D-Jade actually is. Not archaeologists, not linguists, not spiritualists. Its meaning shifts like sand, from throne to symbol to schematic. It shows up in temples built centuries apart, always the same shape, always glowing with importance, but never explained. What kind of culture reuses a shape for 2,000 years without writing down what it means? Maybe the kind that expected you to remember. You stand and walk the silent corridor of the Osirion, the subterranean temple, rumoured to be older than the temple above it. Its stones are enormous, unmarked, set in ways that defy tool marks and logic. Many Egyptologists quietly avoid talking about it. It doesn't fit, doesn't behave, doesn't explain itself, and some suspect it predates dynastic Egypt entirely. You press your palm to one of its walls and feel nothing, but also everything. Osiris, torn apart and resurrected, his spine a column of unknown purpose, his body transformed, not restored, worshipped not for his rule, but his reactivation. This isn't mythology, it's legacy management, and the legacy is power. Because whether Osiris was man, machine, or metaphor, he was never quite allowed to stay dead. And something about that should make you wonder what else in Egypt might still be waiting to wake up. You leave Abydos with the D-Jed pillar still ghosting behind your eyelids. Every time you blink, it's there, standing tall, humming invisibly, like a forgotten battery, waiting for hands that remember how to switch it back on. But the desert doesn't let you drift too far into symbols. It's already drawing you toward the next enigma, a smaller one maybe, but far more annoying. A bug. Specifically, the scarab beetle. You're walking through the ruins of Karnak when you see it again. A giant stone scarab squatting near a dried ceremonial lake, its granite back polished smooth by 5,000 years of pilgrim hands. It doesn't look terrifying. It doesn't even look impressive, but somehow it's everywhere. Scarabs roll dung. That's what they do. They find animal droppings, shape them into perfect spheres, lay their eggs inside, and roll the whole mess across the sand like frantic little janitors of the afterlife. It's unglamorous, it's weird, it's deeply revered, because in ancient Egypt, this little insect wasn't a joke, it was a god. They called it Khepri, the rising sun incarnate, the force that pushes the sun across the sky each morning, the pilot of Ra's solar bark, and yes, the head of this celestial entity, a scarab. Historians still argue whether this association was purely symbolic or based on something more observational, but here's where it gets uncomfortably specific. Modern biologists discovered in 2013 that the dung beetle is the only insect known to navigate using the Milky Way. Let that land for a second. An insect without a brain as complex as yours uses galactic orientation to roll poop home. Not the moon, not the sun, the freaking Milky Way. So maybe the Egyptians weren't romanticizing nonsense. Maybe they noticed something we forgot to notice. Or maybe they were remembering something they'd once been told. Something stellar. You walk around the giant scarab statue. It sits in the open, as if guarding not just a temple, but a narrative thread. And that thread is absurdly cosmic. Scarabs became symbols of rebirth, resurrection, celestial movement. They were placed on mummies' chests, where the heart would weigh against truth in the afterlife. They were stamped into seals, amulets, sacred texts. Scarabs were the flash drives of divine approval. But if they were just bugs, why all the reverence? Why depict Khepri not as a metaphor, but as a being? In temple walls, he's shown with a full human body and the head of a scarab, not a poetic rendering, a literal one. And while you're at it, ask yourself this: why does Ra need a pilot? Isn't he a god? Unless, of course, the sunbark wasn't just poetic, unless it was a craft, a vessel, a chariot whose navigation required knowledge of the stars, the galaxy, even gravitational pathways we haven't charted yet. And if Khepri was the pilot, then the scarab-headed god wasn't just a bug deity. He was an operator, a controller of cosmic mechanisms, perhaps even the interface for steering through interdimensional corridors. It sounds insane until you realize you're standing in a culture that wrote entire books about how to launch a soul into the stars, that built architecture aligned not just to the sun, but to deep space coordinates, a culture that embalmed animals, not for food, not for art, but because they believed those creatures could guide the dead between worlds. You stare into the blank granite eyes of the statue and feel a little stupid, because it's a beetle, just a beetle, until it isn't, until it's something that saw the sky as a map instead of a ceiling. And just when you start to dismiss the whole thing again, you remember this: in nearly every tomb you've seen, scarabs are present, not just drawn, not just mentioned, embedded, placed strategically, scarabs guiding the heart, scarabs inscribed with spells, scarabs little round bugs, tasked with ferrying human souls to eternity. This wasn't decoration, this was programming. And now, every step you take through Karnak feels like it's being watched, not by gods, not by kings, but by bugs, star bugs, memory bugs. And suddenly the question isn't why the Egyptians worshipped them, it's why we stopped. You leave Karnak, your mind spinning with beetles and barks, star maps and metaphors that may not have been metaphors at all. The desert wind licks your cheeks as if to say, it gets weirder, and it does, because your next stop isn't a pyramid or a tomb. It's a question in stone, carved, unyielding and deeply out of place. Abydos, again, specifically the temple of Seti the Fons. You enter cautiously. The walls breathe with story, long corridors of reliefs and hieroglyphs that detail the rituals, the offerings, the processions of the gods. But it's not the main chambers that draw your eye. It's one weird patch of ceiling tucked behind a lintel in the hyperstyle hall, and on it the infamous Abydos helicopter. Yes, a helicopter. Next to what looks like a tank and a spaceship, and what some swear is a futuristic aircraft or hovercraft. Historians still argue whether these shapes are coincidental overlaps of palimpsests, texts rewritten over older carvings, or whether ancient stonemasons simply had a sense of humor. But the internet doesn't buy that, nor secretly do you, because you've seen enough by now to know that Egypt wasn't careless with symbols. They didn't just doodle across ceilings. Every line had weight, every curve encoded legacy. So when you stare at what looks suspiciously like modern technology carved into a 3,000-year-old temple, your skin tightens. The official explanation, it's just erosion, layers of hieroglyphs that accidentally formed familiar shapes. Case closed. Except no other palimpsests across Egypt ever accidentally looked like Apache helicopters, or submarines, or drones. You step away from the carvings, still staring, whether it's pareidolia or proof. Something inside you stirs, because symbols repeat, stories mutate, and maybe this isn't the first time humanity has built something that could fly, or remembered that someone else did. And that brings you to the stelae. Not just any stelae, the famine stelae. It sits quietly on Sahel Island, upstream from Aswan, where the Nile narrows and the granite boulders crowd like forgotten gods. Inscribed on its face are 32 columns of hieroglyphs. At first glance, it reads like a bureaucratic memo, a drought, a plea to the gods. Pharaoh Djoser asking the high priest Imhotep for help, and Imhotep, brilliant, suspiciously omniscient Imhotep, discovers the secrets of the gods stored in a sacred book inside a temple. But the details are what twist the knife. Because that sacred book, it's said to contain the knowledge of Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, time, and sacred geometry. And Thoth didn't just bless people with cleverness. He gave them language, architecture, astronomy. He designed the universe, some said, like a mathematician high on metaphysics. So what exactly did this book contain? The stela doesn't say, which of course makes it worse. Some believe it described how to build the pyramids. Others think it held the coordinates of the stars, the numerical keys to life and death. And a few, those delightful tinfoil romantics, swear it outlined how to operate the gods' technology, machines, vessels, gates. Because again and again, in Egyptian lore, we find stories of divine tools, and skyboats, and sound that lifts stone, and always somewhere Thoth is involved, as if he were less a deity and more a custodian, a librarian who sometimes forgot to lock the doors. You sit on a boulder near the stela and imagine Djoser, desperate and parched, reaching for wisdom, not of this world, and being handed schematics, instructions, passwords. The story doesn't say whether the drought ends because of divine mercy or mechanical intervention. It just says the pharaoh built temples in thanks. Standard religious exchange, unless it wasn't thanks. Unless it was payment. Which brings us back to the helicopters. If symbols repeat, and they do, then maybe Egypt was littered with icons we can't decode, because we refuse to believe they are icons. We call them myths. We say it's just a story. But every story has a birthplace. Every glyph has a precedent. What if Egypt wasn't just remembering its past? What if it was preserving someone else's? You rise, brushing dust from your hands. The stela glows faintly in the sunlight, as if embarrassed, and somewhere behind your ribs a new kind of discomfort settles in. Not fear, not even awe. Just the creeping suspicion that the gods didn't write in metaphor. They wrote in blueprints. The heat has softened now, curling along the stones like a contented cat, and the Nile murmurs somewhere nearby. You find yourself pulled to the west bank, to a tomb cut low into the limestone, a place less famed than Giza, but far more conspiratorial. This isn't just where kings were buried, this is the Valley of the Kings, where gods were whispered about behind sealed doors. You pass faded colonnades and half-collapsed facades, but you're not here for the famous names. You're here for a door. Specifically, a door carved in stone that doesn't open. They call it a false door, found in dozens of tombs, always facing west toward death, the afterlife, and something more elusive. The Egyptians believed the soul had multiple parts. The Ka, the Ba, the Ach. The Ka was the life force. The Ba was personality, spirit, maybe even memory. And the Ach, well, no one's really sure. Enlightenment, transcendence, it's the word they used when transformation occurred, when something changed form, something strange. Historians still argue whether the false doors were symbolic, just psychological architecture, or whether they were meant to function as portals, as gateways, as transmitters even. But every false door is paired with offerings, with text. They weren't just spiritual metaphors, they were used. You crouch before one now. It's cut cleanly into the wall, flanked by prayers and spells. Its lintel bears the name of a long-forgotten official whose rank outranked his afterlife. And the moment you're close, you feel it, the eerie precision of it all, the shape, the smoothness, the quiet hum you can't quite name. Why make a door that leads nowhere unless it once did? These doors weren't just placed arbitrarily, they were positioned with celestial intent. Most face west, yes, but others align to key constellations. Orion, Sirius, Draco, like they were tuned to something or someone. You remember the pyramid texts, how they speak of the pharaoh rising into the sky, of travelling by ladder or sunbeam to join the gods. And those spells? Some scholars believe they were instructions, not just for safe passage, but for activation. Read this, say this, go here, step through. And then there's the weighing of the heart. Everyone loves this story. The soul placed on one side of a scale, a feather on the other. If your heart is heavy with sin, it's devoured by Amit, part lion, part hippo, part crocodile, a Frankenstein of judgment. But if your heart is light, you pass through, not just to paradise, to transformation. It's a ritual, yes, but it's also suspiciously mechanical, a system, a filtration protocol. And what awaits on the other side? That's where things get foggy. The Egyptians described it as the field of reeds, an eternal mirror of Egypt. But better, no taxes, no sand in your sandals, just endless grain and sunsets. But buried in deeper texts, coffin spells, books of gates, you find something stranger, descriptions of the soul travelling by boat, passing through tunnels, facing guardians, being reassembled, not unlike Osiris. The soul must know passwords, must face challenges. It's not just a walk into paradise. It's a puzzle, a test, a trial, or a system check. You step back from the false door, suddenly aware of your reflection in the stone, and it hits you. The bar, that wandering spirit part, was depicted as a bird with a human head, capable of leaving the body, capable of returning, capable, perhaps, of navigating. What if the Egyptians didn't believe in death so much as migration? What if the tomb wasn't a place to rest, but a place to launch? You glance around at the surrounding tombs, so many names, so many stories, and all of them built with precision, with ritual, with intent, not to keep the dead in, but to get something else out. A signal, a soul, a message. And maybe if the soul passed through correctly, if the doors aligned and the spells held and the scarabs guided well, maybe the dead didn't just live again. Maybe they arrived somewhere else. Maybe the tomb was never the end. Maybe it was the beginning of an outbound journey. And maybe the real mystery isn't where the tomb leads, but who was waiting on the other side. You descend again, but this time deeper, mentally as well as geographically. Your feet find their way to Dia el Medina, a workers' village hidden behind cliffs, where artisans carved tombs for the elite and whispered secrets over pottery shards. This place wasn't royal, it was secret, and in its walls you begin to notice the faint outlines of something no guide ever mentions: maps. Not the cartographic kind, no Nile bends or merchant caravans, but celestial maps, faint star charts, and constellations carved near worker housing by artisans who maybe hoped the dead wouldn't need more than geometry to navigate. Orion appears, his belt faint yet deliberate. Sirius floats nearby, scattered across walls that were never meant for tourists, never intended for sermons, just utility, just maps, sketched in silent desperation. You trail a finger over faded lines. They curve in ways that don't mimic desert dunes. They intersect in patterns that suggest intent, a route, a destination. And you realize these are worker relics, not royal proclamations. Everyday stone scribbles that survived cleaning crews and modern cleaners because they didn't look official enough to erase, yet they remained quiet, persistent. Historians still argue whether Deir el-Medina was truly a center of magic graffiti, folk astronomy, carved by workers, as opposed to sacred architecture. Some claim it's folly to take casual carvings seriously, but carving stars inside tomb workers' quarters, that feels like paranoia or devotion, and more than a little technical, because here's the thing, the workers would later carve inside tombs, maps, and guides too, but inside royal burial chambers, those same constellations become arrows, gates, paths, not decorations, waypoints, as if the worker maps were rough drafts of what the elite chambers would become, or burial instructions written in stone. You sit, letting the narrative twist in your mind, not myths, not decoration, but practical toolkits for cosmic navigation, for souls, for travelers, for disembodied personalities who needed to know where to go once freed from flesh. And that's when you spot something else, molds, for small scarab amulets buried beneath doorways. Workers had left pieces, tiny talismans shaped like beetles, small enough to carry in a pouch, made from clay mixed with mud from the Nile. Every single home had one, everyone, and yet they don't show them in museums. They're considered common or insignificant. But maybe they were neither. Maybe they were essential tools, portable compass beetles meant to guide souls between worlds, a personal key to spiritual GPS. You pace slowly, breath shallow, because if even artisans used those symbols like tools, maybe the elite didn't. Maybe the higher you rose, the more utility you packed into religion, art, architecture, myth. You stand at the edge of the village, the desert yawning beyond, and you wonder what else remains overlooked. How many tools have we mistaken for tokens? How much of ancient Egypt is practical memory, hidden in plain sight? The sun sets, turning the sandstone red. You feel a shift under your feet. Maybe that's just the temperature. Or maybe the ground is responding, rebuking you, standing on centuries of instructions, standing on the layering of myth, tech, astronomy, belief, all fused into desert stone. And you understand, Deir el-Medina wasn't a settlement. It was a laboratory, a testing ground, a workshop for ideas that would take the king into the sky. You turn to leave, looking back at homes with broken pottery, with half-finished scarabs and maps carved into cabins. They don't shout, they whisper, but you've listened. And now, every time you think of Egypt, it's not the pharaohs that matter most. It's the workers, because they built the machines. You follow a dry Wadis path to the edge of the Nile, and eventually arrive at a remote bluff where the rock face carries mysterious carvings nearly millennia old. This place's name is Wadi Hammamat. Travelers used it as a trade route, yes, but its deeper purpose seems to have been far more cryptic, a catalogue of celestial coordinates carved into stone. Not myth, not legend, but maps, raw, unapologetic, and precise. You brush away dust, and the faint outline of a star cluster reveals itself. Then another, a geometric layout that doesn't reflect terrain, but sky. Instead of caravans or watercourses, you find coordinates aligned with the summer solstice, the heliacal rising of Sirius, and the position of Orion midwinter. These inscriptions weren't casual, they're technical, possibly pre-written guidelines for orientation along the route. Historians still argue whether these are just navigational markers for caravans or something more. A few claim that Neolithic traders carved them so they wouldn't get lost in the desert, but that doesn't explain why they correspond so precisely to constellations, and why the glyphs include symbols that echo the pyramid texts, steps, stars, doors, flight. You crouch next to the map, and trace the path of lines connecting points that seem to indicate not trade stops but travel points, launch stations, points of departure. The desolation around the carvings, which has never changed much, feels intentional. These weren't tourism waypoints. They were stargates in embryo. Pictures of the inscriptions show them interspersed with unusual glyphs, spiral corridors, stacked columns, rows of stars, small scarabs beside them. The symbols feel like a language of motion, movement, encoded in stone. Some researchers who study these carvings emphasize that the names of gods appear as verbs. Thoth ascends, Khepri navigates, Osiris opens. Active voice, instructions, not praise. By obscuring these shapes behind centuries of sand and weather, Egyptologists dismiss them as incidental. But here you are, shoulder deep in sand and history, and the glyphs don't lie. They stare back, data sunk in rock. You realize that the significance of Wadi Hammamet isn't its trade, it's its signal. These coordinates aren't for merchants. They're windless, static mnemonics for celestial movement, for stars piercing the horizon, for departures timed to galactic rhythms, for identity transitions, not of goods but of souls. Carving navigation maps on stone isn't farming, it's spacecraft programming. Then you recognize the irony. These scribes, working far from the grand tombs and temples, used the same symbols and logic that surround you in Giza, Karnak, and Abydos, the same star clusters, the same beetles, the same doors and pillars, only they did so illicitly, without pharaohs watching. And yet their records survive. You stand under the scorching noonday sun, letting the carved lines coat your vision. They don't feel abandoned, they feel hidden, as though someone wanted them to wait until we learned how to read again. You trace the path of a scarab rolling alongside lines of stars. Think of the beetle rolling its dung ball by seeking the Milky Way, and you sense a pattern, movement, motion, navigation between worlds, times, bodies. The silence of the desert is profound. No tourists, no guided tours, just you, the stone, the sky, and the low hum in your bones, like instructions waiting to be understood. You step away slowly, dust rising, hearts pounding under the sun. The carvings stay behind, etched in granite, untouchable, unmoved, but you carry them in memory now. Maybe these maps were carved for use in transit, preparation points for some celestial algorithm, inscribed in advance. Or maybe they were breadcrumb warnings. If you reach this point, beware, you're approaching the sky's edge. But as you leave Wadi Hammamet behind, walking toward the path down to the river and civilization, you realize that nothing you've seen tonight is a story of gods and kings. It's a cartographic declaration of defiance, an atlas of ascent, written in prehistoric stone and surviving because someone once wanted you to follow. What were they guiding toward? It wasn't death, it was destination. And maybe those destinations still linger, just beyond the horizon of our understanding. Night returns, and as darkness settles, your thoughts orbit around the possibility that ancient Egypt was less a kingdom and more a station, a coordinate station in time. The sky above Cairo hangs low, littered with stars, moving slowly in ancient patterns that match carved charts you've chased across deserts. And now you stand before the temple of Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahri, a structure that's not about pharaohs so much as projections of power, of memory, of something more destabilizing. The temple rises in terraces of ochre stone, suspended against the cliff face like a cosmic docking port. Ornate reliefs depict export expeditions, divine births, victories over foreigners, but these panels have been exhaustively studied. Tonight, you're here for one obscure symmetry, the temple's axial alignment with the winter solstice sun and with the rising of Orion's bright stars centuries ago. This axis doesn't just carve a ceremonial walkway, It creates a precise beam of light during winter sunrise, illuminating the statues inside at just one moment a year. Iceberg grids of stone, carved with devotion, calculated to channel photons into sanctified geometry. It's astronomy made monument, light made code. Historians still argue whether these orientations were deliberate astronomical acts or religious theatre, but a beam of sunlight hitting the innermost sanctuary during a specific cosmic alignment feels less like coincidence and more like instruction. The temple was built for routine cosmic events, for ritual-based timekeeping, perhaps to synchronize with something more than the Nile flood. The narratives within the sanctuary speak of divine birth. Hatshepsut emerges from Amun's knee like a child generated by a solar deity. But beneath the mythology, scholars note anomalies, figures positioned with odd spatial relations, eyes turned not toward each other, but toward the passage of sunlight. It's as if the story was meant to be lit at the moment of cosmic alignment, not simply told but triggered. You feel minor goosebumps as light strikes exactly when the two rays converge, an intersection as precise as the angles inside the Great Pyramid. That light brushes over statue and hieroglyph alike, illuminating figures in perfect alignment. Was it a script, a stage, or a signaling mechanism that opens on a schedule no longer readable? Hatshepsut's temple isn't a tomb. It's not even a palace. It's an astronomical timer, a calendar, a cosmic beacon, time to mark seasonal transitions, and perhaps open hidden mechanisms when the planets align or the stars rotate back into place. A mausoleum to memory, a machine for marking eternal return. And just like that, you wonder if every parade, every ceremony, every piece of symbolism in these temples isn't about piety at all, but synchronicity. The Egyptians constructed their monuments to occur along timelines, like celestial clocks. The skull-chilling implication: someone wanted time to repeat ritualistically, to feel ancient events converge again, to reset. You step outside as the sun fades, the last of the rays sliding across the terraces. Now the structure looks different, less like a storybook and more like a circuit board. You realize this. There's no accidental alignment in these places, no hero-making without a calendar gate, no ritual performance without a light-based key. It's not theatre, it's architecture-coded belief. And walking away, you no longer see the temple as the story of a woman pharaoh. You see an instruction manual in stone, and that shifts everything. In the hush of early dawn, you find yourself brushing against the mystery of Karnak again, this time inside the temple of Mut, goddess of creation. It's quieter here, less travelled, unlisted in most guidebooks, yet somehow this space pulses with the same coded logic you've slowly pieced together, ritual geometry and hidden meaning, as if every goddess shrine echoed the same cosmic blueprint. You wander down a corridor carved from sandstone, the walls on either side lined with columns, engraved in repetitive symmetry. Mut's temple is an arrangement of mirrored pillars, each with slightly offset grooves, not decorative but deliberate. You follow these patterns, and they form alignments that correspond to the brightest stars illuminated in the southern sky, above stars long since shifted from view, yet frozen in stone at the exact angle they held 4,000 years ago. You pause at a statue of Mut herself, regal, silent, missing her head, courtesy of time or vandalism, but her body remains carved in immaculate detail, her stance set at an angle relative to the corridor that catches morning light in a staggered pattern. Each light shaft slices across her silhouette in a sequence, like a triggering mechanism timed precisely to celestial motion outside, beyond the temple walls. Historians still argue whether these alignments were ceremonial art or intentional. Some say celestial impressions were secondary to religious function. But there's something petulant, even bold, in the way these stones interact with sunlight, not merely reflecting, but prioritizing. Light moves through here like a laser scanner, revealing secrets only at specific intervals, at dawn, at solstice, at equinox, only when the stars align. Above the columns, faint glyphs cluster away from sacred imagery. Their étoile signs, stars, constellations, and arcs drawn in low relief. Not murals, not halos, data. They coordinate light, stone, and time into sequences, pauses, alignments. You lean in, touch each glyph, sense it existed not for beauty but for utility, programming light, marking, or triggering a silent ritual coded in stone. And then there's the iconography, depictions of mute, holding jar-like containers beneath her arms, vessels stylized with spiral patterns, not shapes of fertility jars, but resonators, possibly amplifiers. Art, sure, or perhaps archetypes of technology, fluid inside, access points, storage. These jars aren't empty. They are imagined containers for memory, energy, or transformation, symbols of resurrection technology, disguised as divine artifact. You drift out of the building, stepping into columns of morning sun. Outside, birds wheel overhead, alignments shifting slowly like gears in a clock, and you realize that every Egyptian temple, even those dedicated to goddesses, operates less like worship houses and more like chronometric engines. These structures weren't designed for gods to live in. They were built to run, to pulse, to resonate, to store the echo of stars. Each corridor, each shrine, each carved statue is a node in a network that operates not on myth, but on cycles: the sun, stars, light, time, human pulse. You're unsure if these installations were meant to preserve memory or activate it, but either way, they speak to architectural intelligence. They likely served as guardians, holding knowledge, preserving rituals, protecting data, encoded in geometry. Standing beneath Karnak's pillars, shaded but stained with golden light, you feel both small and locked in, part of the devotional sequence, yet outside its control. This is the architecture of instruction, not inspiration, a design not for hearts, but for circuits. You leave Mute's temple last, the air alive with possible codes and symmetries. The sun's rays chase one another across stone, repeating sequences written before kings were painted in gold, and you finally understand this is pattern-making at immemorial scale. And every step through these temples, from Giza to Karnak, feels less religious than algorithmic. But perhaps religion was always intended to be algorithm. Night deepens around Luxor, yet the temples still thrum with silent resonance. The desert's chill edges around your shoulders, a tactile reminder. You're still in Egypt, but the narrative has shifted. It isn't about gods and kings anymore. It's about architecture that instructs, about data etched in stone. Tonight, your guide is the temple of Edfu, dedicated to Horus, the sky god, whose myths now feel less mythical and more mechanical. You enter the sanctuary under a full moon, pale light draped across reliefs of Horus perched on a lotus, parading through serpents and triumphing over Set. But you're not here for myth. You're here for the measurements. Each chamber's width corresponds to stellar angles, stone threshold heights, map to celestial coordinates. The temple's alignment with the horizon marks not just cardinal direction, but specific rising points of Orion, Sirius, and Leo 10,000 years ago, not approximated, carved with exactitude. Historians still argue whether temple orientation intended astronomical reference or symbolic metaphors, but carving a sanctuary's steps to align with dead stars, then painting them with dayglow paint and calling it unlikely architecture, someone's undercounting coincidence, because what you're seeing here is consistency across centuries, dynasties, pharaohs, and gods. Every temple echoes the same logic. Geometry unlocks myth. Myth hides diagrams, and those diagrams whisper calibration. One chamber holds inscriptions overlaid with nested star charts. Overlay one panel with another, and constellations shift like puzzle pieces. Orion drifts diagonally into Sirius. Lines intersect like circuits. Small glyphs, speaking of opening gates, lifting stones, ascending the sky, are etched in margins as footnotes. Footnotes to spells turn screwdrivers. You move through the temple, noticing how every relief, every seam where limestone blocks meet, aligns to match star positions at different epochs. It's as if the temple commemorated not a specific cosmic moment, but multiple ones, an entire celestial timeline encoded in the building itself, allowing the initiates to navigate between eras as well as worlds. And a myth of Horus, suddenly stripped of drama. It reads differently. A deity born of divine engineering, nurtured by seeds, planted by celestial visitors, fighting chaos not with magic, but with mechanisms. The falcon, once a symbol of sovereignty, now feels like a model of a navigational tool, sleek and aerodynamic. You pause before a wall, where Horus's eyes seem carved, to look not at human visitors, but at solar reflections etched in rock. Above them, a panel lists his titles. Lord of the Sky, Pilot of Ra's Bark. That word again, pilot. It wasn't symbolic, it was operational. Someone piloted the sun, or something that moved through stars. You trace the lines drawn between Horus and the Milky Way, sculpted next to his post-battle stance. These aren't art motifs, they're path markers, showing a route through hell, through sky, through judgment, and out again. Ritual and technology blur, myth and code merge. As you leave Eid Fu under the moonlight, you feel the architecture around you doesn't observe you so much as calculate you. Cross this threshold at this time, step across this threshold at this angle, recite this name, receive passage, or maybe unlock part of the mechanism again. You realize what archaeologists find uncanny. The temple is too consistent. It behaves like a system, a software, layers of stone and light that operate only when steps are taken, precisely, spells spoken correctly, alignments recalibrated, repeatable, reusable, programmed. And like the scarab talismans, the pyramid texts, the serapeum and the solar beam timelines, each structure follows a guideline, a design, an instruction manual. Not theology, technology. And somewhere between Luxor and eternity, you feel a clicking deep within, an expectation, a waiting. You don't know whether the temples are dormant or dormant but alive, like machinery in standby. But that can wait until you wake up. The morning sun blazes overhead as you make your way to the tomb of Menes, the legendary first pharaoh who united Upper and Lower Egypt. This figure is part man, part myth, said to have inherited his throne from Horus himself, a god-king whose reign straddled the boundary between mortal and divine. Menes' story isn't just about kingship, it's about lineage, legacy, and something far more unsettling, inheritance of cosmic responsibility. You stand before the sparse remains of a site attributed to Menes. Not much left but scattered stones and faint outlines, but the mythology around him is dense. Before Menes, it is said, Egypt was ruled by gods who lived among humans. They didn't just visit, they stayed, walked, talked, changed the land, shared knowledge. Then, one day they left, vanished into the skies, or beyond the stars, and Menes inherited their throne, not just by conquest, but by appointment. Historians still debate whether Menes was a real person, a symbolic title, or a mythic amalgamation of early rulers. But in the mythology, his reign marks a transition, the end of direct divine rule, and the beginning of human kingship under godly guidance. The implication is chilling. What if Menes' reign represented the moment when humanity took over the caretaking of alien knowledge, when the gods entrusted their technology, their secrets, their cosmic architecture to mortal hands? You imagine the weight of that inheritance, not just earthly power, but stewardship over something far beyond politics or land, the responsibility to maintain alignment between earth and the heavens, to keep the celestial machinery running, to guard the gates to other worlds. Menes himself was depicted with bull horns, a nod to the divine Apis bull cult, and crowned with the double crown of unified Egypt. The bull wasn't just a sacred animal, it was a living symbol of the link between gods and men, earth and sky, flesh and machine. You recall the Serapeum, the massive sarcophagi built for these bulls. Could Menes have been the first human to understand what those containment chambers really held? And what happened when the gods left? Did the technology go silent? Did it fall into the hands of mortals, unready for such power? There's a story that Menes was guided by Horus himself, a god-man with a mission. The texts say Horus walked the earth with flesh and blood, teaching and ruling. And then, like all legends of gods walking among men, he vanished. But his legacy didn't. Instead, it was coded into architecture, ritual, and law, into monuments like the pyramids, temples, and tombs that still rise against the desert sky. You glance at the horizon, where the sun sets over the Nile. The river's flow feels like time itself, carrying memories downstream, carrying myths, carrying ancient truths. Because what if the unification of Egypt wasn't just political? What if it was technological, the passing of a torch from star-born gods to earthly kings? You realize that Menes' story is not about a king or a nation. It's about the moment humanity stepped up to keep cosmic balance, about inheriting something bigger than kingdoms or empires, an entire network of knowledge and power encoded in stone, hidden in plain sight. You leave the site, dust swirling around your feet, a mixture of awe and quiet dread settling in your chest, because you're starting to see the real story, the one hidden beneath myths, beneath archaeology, beneath time. It's a story about stewardship, about guardianship, and about a legacy that never truly left. And maybe, just maybe, it's waiting for someone like you to remember. The sun dips low as you make your way toward the winding cliffs of the Theban necropolis, home to the Valley of the Kings. But your focus isn't the familiar tombs or gilded sarcophagi. No, tonight you seek the forgotten whispers, buried deep beneath the earth, passages, corridors, and chambers that hint at something less mortal and more otherworldly. You descend carefully into one of the lesser-known tombs, its walls painted with cryptic symbols and stars, scattered like frozen fireflies. The air here is cool and thick, heavy with the scent of ancient oils and silence, and in that silence you feel the weight of a secret. This is no ordinary burial place. The Egyptians believed that death was a journey, a voyage through perilous realms, requiring spells, maps, and guidance. Yet these tombs, with their narrow shafts and locked chambers, feel more like gates than graves. You notice how many shafts align precisely with celestial bodies, points in the night sky marking pathways for the deceased to follow. Historians still debate whether these alignments are symbolic or functional, but you sense something deliberate. The tombs aren't merely resting places, they're launch pads, portals prepared for a voyage beyond. You recall the ancient texts, the Book of Gates, Book of Caverns, Book of the Earth's Interior, all describing a complex journey through otherworldly regions, guarded by entities and requiring the knowledge of secret names and passwords. The deceased is not merely passing through, but must navigate a cosmic maze, using star maps encoded in hieroglyphs, relying on protective spells to pass through dangers and reach the afterlife. And what awaits on the other side? The field of reeds? A paradise? Or something more akin to a celestial station? A cosmic harbour, where the soul might dock before continuing onward. You trace your fingers along a carving, showing a winged sun disk, a symbol often interpreted as divine protection, but perhaps more literally, a spacecraft or celestial vessel. Nearby scarabs crawl through the stone, more than decoration. Perhaps they represent guides or navigators, those tiny celestial pilots of the afterlife. As you explore, the tomb's layout feels less organic and more engineered. Corridors twist and turn not randomly, but in patterns echoing sacred geometry. Hidden chambers with false doors and secret passages hint at puzzles designed to be solved not just by priests, but by the soul itself. You wonder how many secrets are locked behind these walls, how many gates have yet to be opened, how many journeys remain incomplete. The ancient Egyptians weren't just preparing bodies for burial, they were preparing travellers for cosmic passage, and the silent tomb waits, ready to receive those who know the way. Your footsteps echo softly as you walk deeper into the labyrinth of the Valley of the Kings. The flickering torchlight casts dancing shadows over hieroglyphs that seem to pulse with a secret energy, messages not merely for the dead, but for those who would follow. You begin to sense a rhythm, a cadence to the architecture that transcends mere tomb building. The corridors here aren't just tunnels, they are arteries, designed to channel more than just air or light. They channel passage, not just for the deceased, but for the essence, the spirit, the memory encoded in stone. As you reach a chamber carved deep beneath the earth, you feel the temperature shift. The air grows stiller, heavier. The walls here are etched with intricate patterns that scholars refer to as book passages, sections from the famed books of the dead and the afterlife. But something about their placement, their depth, suggests a functional purpose. The texts don't just tell stories, they instruct. You remember the ancient notion of Ka and Ba, the vital forces that compose a person's soul. The Ka as life force, and the Ba as individuality, capable of moving freely between realms. The tombs seem designed to facilitate this movement, creating a passageway for these forces to escape the corporeal confines and embark on their journey. Historians still argue over the exact interpretations of these rites and texts, but you're drawn to one persistent idea. The tombs were not prisons but gateways. Each false door, each secret chamber, each angled shaft points to a cosmic trajectory, an opening in the fabric of reality meant to be navigated by the departed. You study the carvings of winged figures, often thought to be guardians, but perhaps more accurately operators, beings guiding the soul across dimensions. The imagery is technological in its specificity. Instruments, controls, and pathways, all symbolized through mythic language. You think about the scarabs again, those tiny beetles whose movements are guided by the Milky Way, and now you see them anew, not just as symbols of rebirth, but as guides for souls riding the stellar currents. The tomb is a spacecraft, the corridors are flight paths, the spells, the navigation manuals. The dead were pilots in training. As you step back, the tomb seems to breathe, a living, waiting machine, humming with encoded power. You can almost hear the faint pulse of engines long dormant. And outside, the desert wind carries the ancient song of journeys yet to come. The desert night deepens, and you find yourself standing once more on the Giza Plateau, the Great Pyramid, towering above like an eternal sentinel. You've travelled far from celestial alignments to subterranean chambers, from scarab talismans to cosmic blueprints etched in stone, and now everything seems to converge back here at the epicenter of this ancient enigma. The pyramid's limestone blocks, cool beneath your fingers, still whispering secrets in their silent, stoic language. You recall the countless mysteries you've uncovered, the alignment to true north with impossible precision, the cubit that measures the earth itself, the coordinates matching the speed of light, the star maps carved into hidden tombs, and the mythic machines hidden behind hieroglyphs. Historians have long argued these were symbols, stories, religious expressions, but you see patterns too intricate, too deliberate to be coincidence. The Great Pyramid and its companions aren't just monuments. They're a nexus, a living system of knowledge, encoded in stone and shadow, a machine designed for passage beyond death, beyond time, perhaps even beyond this dimension. You imagine the builders, masters of geometry and astronomy, keepers of secret knowledge, custodians of cosmic gates. Whether guided by gods, aliens, or forgotten ancestors, they left behind not just tombs, but invitations, instructions encoded in architecture, in ritual, in myth, and in mathematics. You feel the desert air grow still, as if holding its breath. The stars wheel overhead in their ancient dance, the same dance that shaped these stones and their purpose. The scarab's journey across the Milky Way, the flight of Osiris beyond the veil, the rise of Horus to the sun's chariot, all parts of a grand cosmic narrative that you've only begun to understand. And as you stand there, caught between stone and star, past and future, you realize this story isn't over. The monuments wait for knowledge to awaken, for memory to return, for journeys to begin anew. But that awakening can wait until you wake. You return to the Great Pyramid with a mixture of reverence and skepticism, knowing that beneath its ancient stones lies a tangle of mystery wrapped in whispers. The talk of secret chambers, hidden rooms concealed by millennia of dust and silence, has captured imaginations for centuries. But are these chambers real, or just the latest version of a tale told to lure the curious? You remember recent explorations using radar technology and muon tomography, modern tools that promise to see inside stone without breaking it open. In 2017, a surprising void was detected above the Grand Gallery, sparking headlines. Secret chamber discovered. You lean closer, heart racing at the thought of a hidden room, maybe holding forgotten artifacts, alien technology, or lost knowledge. Yet, as you sift through research and experts' heated debates, the picture blurs. Some specialists claim the void is a natural cavity, a construction anomaly, or simply a space left for structural balance, like a hidden buttress in stone. Others whisper of concealed chambers deliberately built to protect priceless treasures or sacred texts. And then there are the fringe voices, louder in the echo chamber of conspiracy, that declare the pyramid a tomb-sized spaceship with the secret room as its control center. You pace the polished limestone floor, wondering who's right, or if the truth is somewhere in between. After all, the pyramid itself is a masterclass in architectural precision. It's hard to believe its builders would leave such an oversight, but it's equally hard to imagine they'd design a chamber so secret that modern science can't even confirm its purpose. Historians still argue whether these secret spaces are architectural necessities or deliberate hiding places, and you can't help but think maybe the whole concept of secret chambers is a reflection of our own modern hunger for mystery, our desire to believe that the past holds secrets we have yet to grasp. Yet the pyramid stands silently, indifferent to our guesses, its stones keeping secrets in their cold embrace. You find yourself caught in the middle, not quite believing the hype, yet unwilling to dismiss the possibility that something lies beneath, waiting for the right eyes to find it. And just when you think you've reached the end of the line, the silence suggests there's more, because maybe, after all, some doors are meant to stay closed. As you wander through the vast collections of hieroglyphs carved into temple walls and tombs, one thing strikes you. Not all of these symbols have been understood. Some signs, cryptic and enigmatic, have defied translation for decades, even centuries. Untranslatable hieroglyphs, the ancient Egyptians' own secret code locked in stone, have become a playground for both scholars and conspiracy theorists. You can almost hear the sighs of Egyptologists poring over dusty manuscripts and inscriptions, scratching their heads in frustration. The hieroglyphic script is vast, intricate, and sophisticated, yet it includes symbols that don't fit known vocabulary or grammar. Some signs appear only once or twice, isolated and unexplained, tantalizing, like a word on the tip of your tongue you can't quite recall. Scholars debate whether these odd glyphs represent lost dialects, specialized religious or magical languages, or even intentional encryption by the priests. After all, these were not just scribes, but gatekeepers of sacred knowledge, protecting wisdom that perhaps was never meant for every eye. One peculiar set of symbols appears repeatedly in tombs associated with the afterlife, but resists classification. They look less like words and more like diagrams or technical drawings, abstract forms that could represent concepts beyond human language. Some suggest these were spells or formulas, encoded as visual mantras rather than phonetic scripts. You chuckle softly to yourself, imagining ancient Egyptians playing an elaborate game of hide and seek with meaning. I guess they wanted to keep their secrets extra secret, you muse, like putting a padlock on a door and then hiding the key inside a puzzle. But these untranslatable signs have consequences. They fuel fringe theories of lost technologies, alien contact, and hidden knowledge. Some fringe enthusiasts believe the Egyptians received cosmic instructions and encoded them in symbols only intelligible to the initiated or otherworldly. Historians still argue whether these untranslatable glyphs are linguistic dead ends or clues to a deeper esoteric tradition. Either way, their presence adds an unsettling layer to the pyramid's perfect geometry and the temple's precise alignments. You feel like a detective with a half-finished puzzle, pieces in hand, but the picture just out of focus. The mystery isn't just what these signs mean, but why they exist at all. Maybe the greatest secret of all is not hidden in the stones, but in the spaces between the words. And that silence, it hums with possibilities. You approach the looming figure of the Sphinx at dawn, the orange-pink light, casting long, exaggerated shadows that seem to stretch into eternity. Its enigmatic face, weathered by millennia, watches over the desert like a silent sentinel. For centuries, it has fascinated travelers and scholars alike, but beneath its familiar exterior lies a vault of mysteries that most people overlook. Commonly thought to be a simple guardian of the Giza Plateau, the Sphinx might be far more than just a monumental statue. You ponder its creation, carved from a single limestone ridge, and its sheer size, which makes it one of the largest monolithic statues on the planet. The conventional narrative attributes it to Pharaoh Khafre, but recent debates suggest it might be far older, possibly predating the known dynasties by thousands of years. Historians still argue about its true age. Some geological studies point to erosion patterns caused by heavy rainfall, hinting at a period much wetter than the last few thousand years, when the Sahara was desert. If these claims hold, the Sphinx could date back to an era when the climate was vastly different, potentially 10,000 years ago or more. This throws a wrench in the mainstream timeline. If the Sphinx is that old, who built it, and why? But the questions don't stop there. The Sphinx's missing nose has sparked numerous theories. Was it deliberately destroyed? By whom? Religious zealots? Invaders? Or was it eroded naturally? Each explanation carries its own shadow of intrigue. There's also the enigmatic Hall of Records legend, a supposed hidden chamber beneath the Sphinx, rumored to hold the secret knowledge of ancient civilizations or even extraterrestrial visitors. Despite numerous explorations, no definitive entrance has ever been found. But that hasn't stopped speculation. You lean against the cool stone and consider the Sphinx's role not just as a guardian of tombs, but as a cosmic symbol. Its lion's body represents strength and kingship, while its human head implies intelligence and awareness. Maybe it was intended as a bridge, a sentinel between earthly power and celestial wisdom. Fringe theorists suggest the Sphinx's alignment with the rising sun during equinoxes was a deliberate celestial marker, a beacon in the desert that tied Egypt's earthly rulers to the stars. You wonder if the Sphinx was less about watching and more about waiting, watching time pass, waiting for a moment when someone would finally understand its silent message. And as the desert wind brushes your cheek, you realize the Sphinx is more than a monument. It is a question carved in stone. And that question still echoes in the empty air. What if the guardian was also the gatekeeper? You can't help but chuckle quietly as you think about how modern engineers must view the ancient Egyptians' construction feats. Here you are standing amid colossal blocks, weighing tens of tons, quarried, transported, and assembled without the wheel, at least officially, without cranes, without iron tools. And yet somehow these stones fit together with such precision that even today's laser cutters would struggle to match. The idea of impossible tools and advanced methods emerges naturally when you consider the scale and accuracy of these structures. For example, the Great Pyramid's casing stones were polished so smoothly that water poured on them would flow without interruption. Corners align almost perfectly to 90 degrees, and surfaces are flush to an uncanny degree. The joints are so tight you couldn't slip a razor blade between them. Historians still argue about the tools Egyptians used, mainly copper chisels, stone hammers, and sand abrasion techniques, but the neatness and durability of these structures keep raising eyebrows. Some speculate that there were tools lost to time, or methods passed down in secret guilds. Others lean toward theories involving vibration, sonic levitation, or other exotic technologies. You picture the quarry workers dragging multi-ton blocks over desert sands without wheels. The ramps hypothesized by archaeologists remain controversial. Some consider them impractical at the necessary scale. There's also the question of how such immense blocks were hoisted to the pyramid's dizzying heights. Theories range from massive earthen ramps to complex pulley systems, but no conclusive evidence supports any method fully. Fringe thinkers propose that the Egyptians had access to technology far beyond what conventional archaeology admits, tools that allowed precision cutting and shaping of stone with ease. Some suggest the use of ancient lasers or resonance-based tools, harnessing sound waves to cleave stone. Others imagine lost machines, passed down from even older civilizations or gifted by extraterrestrials. And here's the kicker. The same meticulous stonework appears not only at Giza, but also in temples and tombs scattered across Egypt, structures thousands of years apart in time, yet sharing the same craftsmanship. You shrug with a knowing smile. I guess if you want to build monuments that outlast empires, you don't mess around with sloppy work. It's humbling and maybe a little infuriating to realize that we still can't replicate much of their handiwork. It makes you wonder, did the Egyptians stumble upon genius accidentally, or were they the inheritors of a forgotten art, a secret science encoded in their culture? As the sun warms the stones, you run your hand over a smooth block, feeling the cold precision beneath your palm. It's as if the stone itself is whispering, "We know more than you think." And maybe they did. You step away from the polished stones of the pyramids and temples and into a broader panorama, Egypt's connections to distant civilizations that stretch beyond the Nile's banks. The idea that Egypt existed in splendid isolation is comforting, but increasingly difficult to defend. Instead, the evidence hints at ancient networks, cross-cultural exchanges, and maybe even shared secrets. Trade routes crisscross the ancient world, but were these simple exchanges of goods, or something more? The tantalizing similarity of motifs and symbols in Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and even as far as the Americas, raises eyebrows. Could it be coincidence? Or did Egyptian knowledge ripple outward or inward across vast distances? Historians still argue whether Egypt's cultural parallels with other ancient civilizations are results of independent development or direct contact. But some architectural features, religious concepts, and technological ideas seem too aligned to ignore. For example, the stepped pyramids of Mesopotamia predate Egypt's pyramids, sparking questions about influence and knowledge transfer. You imagine a world where caravans carried not just spices and gold, but ideas, mathematics, astronomy, sacred geometry. Maybe those gods who once walked Egypt had counterparts in distant lands, sharing knowledge in a clandestine global club. Then there are more speculative connections, puzzling similarities between Egyptian hieroglyphs and scripts found thousands of miles away myths that mirror each other with uncanny accuracy, and artifacts that defy geographic explanation. Some fringe theorists even propose that these connections are evidence of an ancient global civilization or technological network, one that predates recorded history and whose ruins lie buried beneath modern nations. You smile at the thought, maybe the lost civilizations aren't lost at all. Maybe they just moved, merged, and shared. The idea of Egypt as a solitary beacon fades, replaced by a vision of interconnectedness, a world where secrets were passed hand to hand, continent to continent. And maybe those shared secrets are still waiting, scattered in stone, waiting to be pieced together by those patient enough to look. You find yourself drawn to the legends swirling around the mysterious Atlantis, a lost civilization said to have flourished with unimaginable knowledge and power before vanishing beneath the waves. The tantalizing links between Atlantis and ancient Egypt are many, weaving a story that stretches myth and history into a shimmering tapestry of what if. The philosopher Plato first described Atlantis as a powerful empire existing 9,000 years before his time, an advanced civilization that supposedly influenced Egypt. According to some interpretations, the Egyptian priests told Solon, the Athenian lawgiver, that Atlantis was the origin of much of their knowledge, technology, and religious practice. Historians remain skeptical. Many regard Atlantis as allegory or myth, a cautionary tale about hubris, but others argue that the similarities between the two cultures, their monumental architecture, complex societal organization, and celestial knowledge, suggest there might be a kernel of truth beneath the legend. You think about the precise measurements encoded in the Great Pyramid, the mysterious disappearance of advanced knowledge during Egypt's tumultuous periods, and the possibility that this wisdom might have come from a prior civilization like Atlantis. Fringe theorists and alternative historians speculate that survivors of Atlantis could have migrated to Egypt, sharing lost technologies and spiritual practices. Some even propose that the flood myths recorded in Egyptian and Mesopotamian texts might be memories of the cataclysm that sank Atlantis. You ponder the possibility that Atlantis wasn't just a sunken island, but a metaphor for a forgotten era, an epoch when humans walked closer to the stars, wielding powers and technologies that would take millennia to rediscover. Maybe Egypt was a repository, a living archive of that ancient world's knowledge, waiting for humanity to awaken again. And as the desert wind sweeps over the sands, you sense that some stories, like the tides, return again and again, only this time, maybe with a new purpose. Your path takes you to Abydos once again, but this time not for its pyramids or tombs, but for the lesser-known mysteries hidden in its ancient rituals. Abydos, revered as the cult center of Osiris, holds secrets cloaked in ceremony and enigma, rituals so intricate that they blur the line between worship and coded message. You observe the depictions of the mysteries of Osiris, reenacted year after year, a performance filled with symbolism that seems to transcend mere religious storytelling. These rituals speak of death and resurrection, but beneath the surface they hint at processes of transformation far more profound. Historians still debate whether these rites were intended purely as spiritual ceremonies, or if they concealed deeper knowledge that only initiates could understand. Some suggest that the rituals functioned as initiatory passages, metaphoric yet practical, teaching ancient priests how to navigate spiritual or even cosmic realms. You consider the processionals, the sacred boats, and the use of sound and light in the ceremonies. The temple architecture seems designed not only for gatherings, but for acoustics that could manipulate the environment, creating altered states or signals. There are also whispered theories about hidden chambers beneath Abydos, chambers that might have been used for secret rites or as repositories for arcane knowledge. Despite repeated excavations, much remains unexplored, locked away by layers of earth and silence. The imagery of Osiris's dismemberment and resurrection appears in various forms, from hieroglyphs to statues, sometimes with technological overtones, mechanical limbs, djed pillars resembling power conduits. You wonder if these rituals encoded instructions for awakening or reactivating ancient machines disguised as gods. You sense that the rituals of Abydos weren't just about death and rebirth, but about access to knowledge, power, and realms beyond. And as you leave the temple grounds, the echoes of ancient chants seem to linger in the air, a reminder that some mysteries are meant to be felt as much as understood. The shadows of Abydos watch you go, promising that some secrets will only reveal themselves in time. The art of mummification remains one of Egypt's most captivating and confounding secrets. You stand in a dimly lit museum hall, gazing at the carefully preserved bodies of pharaohs and nobles, their wrappings immaculate despite millennia. How did they do it? Was it just ritual, or something closer to a lost science? The process, as you know, was painstaking, removing organs, dehydrating bodies with natron salts, wrapping limbs with linen strips soaked in resins and oils. But beyond the steps, what fascinates you is the precision, the consistency, the longevity, and the knowledge implied. Historians still argue about whether mummification was merely a religious rite or an early form of embalming with surprisingly advanced chemistry. Recent studies suggest Egyptians had a sophisticated understanding of antiseptics and preservatives, using natural substances to inhibit decay. You reflect on the balance between faith and science here. While the rituals involved prayers and spells intended to prepare the soul for the afterlife, the physical preservation was arguably a technological marvel for its time. The dead were not left to chance. Their bodies were engineered for endurance. Some fringe theorists propose that mummification was designed to preserve bodies for interstellar travel, linking back to the idea of pharaohs as cosmic travelers. Could the process have been a form of biological engineering intended to prepare human vessels for other realms or dimensions? You chuckle quietly, imagining an ancient Egyptian lab, a blend of temple priesthood and proto-scientific workshop where sacred texts doubled as chemical manuals. The notion seems odd, but strangely plausible given what you've seen. And then there are the outliers, mummies that defy expectations, cases of exceptional preservation or mysterious substances not yet fully understood raise more questions than answers. Mummification, you realize, was not just about death. It was about preservation of identity, of memory, of potential. As you walk away from the display, the silence hums with the weight of what has been preserved and what remains to be uncovered. Section 31. You step out into the bustling streets of ancient Thebes, where the stars overhead govern more than just the night. In Egypt, astronomy wasn't an abstract science. It was the pulse of life itself, woven into the fabric of politics, religion, and daily routine. The sky was a clock, a calendar, and a compass all at once. Imagine a world where the movement of celestial bodies dictated when the Nile would flood, when crops would be sown, and when festivals should be held. The Egyptians developed a sophisticated understanding of the heavens, charting stars with such precision that their calendars rival modern systems. Their year was divided not just by months, but by the heliacal rising of Sirius, which marked the life-giving inundation of the Nile. But it went beyond agriculture. Pharaohs used astronomy to legitimize their rule, aligning temples and monuments with key stars to symbolically link themselves to divine forces. Kingship was not simply earthly power, it was celestial mandate. The heavens bestowed authority, and the earth reflected it. Historians still argue how deeply astronomy influenced Egyptian politics and society. Some suggest it was central, an invisible thread running through governance and ritual. Others view it as symbolic, more poetic than practical. But the evidence piles up. Obelisks casting shadows at solstices, star charts embedded in tombs, and royal coronations timed to celestial events. You consider how this cosmic governance might have shaped daily life. Priests trained as astronomers read the sky to advise rulers. Farmers watched stars to plan harvests. Sailors used constellations to navigate the Nile and beyond. Even personal fate was entwined with the stars. Birth charts and horoscopes, though primitive compared to modern astrology, reflected a belief that the heavens influenced destiny. The soul's journey after death was mapped in the stars, ensuring continuity between this world and the next. You feel a sense of awe, how a civilization could weave the vast cosmos into everyday existence, blending science, spirituality, and governance into a seamless whole. And as you look up at the night sky, dotted with stars, ancient beyond reckoning, you realize that for the Egyptians, the heavens were not distant, they were home. The final mystery you explore is tucked away deep within the tombs of Egypt's nobility. Objects that don't quite fit. You stare at artifacts that defy explanation, enigmatic items found alongside mummies, their purpose unclear, their design baffling. Among these are small, oddly shaped metal objects, some resembling modern-day batteries, others intricate pendants inscribed with unfamiliar symbols. Historians have catalogued these curiosities, but often dismissed them as religious amulets or tools whose true function has been lost to time. You ponder the Baghdad battery, an artifact thought to be an ancient galvanic cell, sparking debates about whether early civilizations had knowledge of electricity. In Egypt, similar items, such as tiny copper tubes wrapped with iron rods, have been unearthed, though often ignored in mainstream narratives. Then there are the peculiar mechanical models, like the Saqqara bird, a wooden figure resembling a glider. Some believe it was a child's toy. Others claim it's an ancient understanding of aerodynamics. You also notice artifacts that seem technological, mirrors polished to near perfection, lenses that could magnify objects, or metal rings and gears of uncertain use. Some even speculate about advanced machinery, buried with the dead, perhaps to aid their journey beyond life. Skeptics argue these are mere coincidences, misinterpretations, born of wishful thinking. Yet the sheer number of such anomalies, scattered across tombs and temples, invites curiosity. You smile wryly. I guess when you're dead you want all the gadgets you can get. These artifacts, whatever their true nature, hint at knowledge, forgotten or deliberately hidden, encoded in physical form. They challenge assumptions about ancient technology and beckon you to reconsider history's linear narrative. And as you stand amidst these relics, you feel the pulse of mystery, the heartbeat of a civilization that might have been more than stone and sand. A civilization that perhaps touched the stars, with hands that built machines as well as myths, and that thought carries you gently toward sleep. You wander once again through the labyrinthine corridors of ancient Egypt's linguistic history, a tangled tapestry woven from forgotten tongues and lost scripts. Beyond the familiar hieroglyphs and demotic texts, there were languages that thrived and vanished, languages whose echoes still whisper through stone tablets and papyri. Egypt's linguistic diversity was staggering. Ancient Egyptian itself evolved through multiple stages: Old Egyptian, Middle Egyptian, Late Egyptian, each with its own syntax and vocabulary. Yet alongside it, minority languages flourished: Nubian dialects to the south, Coptic scripts in the late periods, and perhaps most intriguingly, the enigmatic Proto-Saharan languages. Historians still debate the extent and influence of these lost tongues. Some suggest that Egypt was a melting pot, absorbing languages from surrounding regions through trade and conquest. Others argue that secret priestly dialects may have existed, languages designed for ritual use, unintelligible to outsiders. You ponder the possibility that some inscriptions remain undeciphered, not because the key is lost, but because the language itself was deliberately arcane, used to guard sacred knowledge. Could these forgotten languages be the real passwords to ancient mysteries? Fringe theorists even speculate that some texts encode multidimensional concepts, ideas not translatable into modern languages, requiring an experiential or spiritual understanding rather than a linguistic one. You muse on the irony. A civilization famed for its writing also thrived on linguistic secrecy, locking away wisdom in tongues that time forgot. Maybe the true hieroglyphs are not on walls, but in the silence between spoken words. And just when you think language has spoken all it can, there's always a new mystery waiting in the lost dialects of Egypt. You settle beneath the shadow of towering columns, and the faint echo of ancient chants seems to ripple through the air. In Egypt, sound and music were never mere entertainment. They were powerful tools, woven into rituals, architecture, and the very fabric of belief. Imagine a temple where every stone is placed to amplify chants, where priests' voices resonate in perfect harmony with sacred spaces, bending sound like light. The Egyptians understood that sound could alter consciousness, bridge worlds, and even influence physical matter. Historians still argue how much of this was science and how much was faith, but the use of instruments, sistrums, harps, drums was ubiquitous in ceremonies intended to invoke gods, purify spaces, or awaken spiritual energies. Some researchers propose that chanting and music created specific frequencies that interacted with the temple's architecture, amplifying their effects. You recall experiments with sound waves, causing physical objects to vibrate, sometimes shattering glass or moving sand into intricate patterns. Could ancient Egyptians have harnessed such acoustic power intentionally? Maybe their rituals were early forms of sonic technology, designed to manipulate space and spirit. Fringe theories suggest sound was used to power certain mechanisms, perhaps even the massive stones themselves, loosening them from quarries or aligning them precisely. They speak of resonance chambers within pyramids, though evidence remains speculative. You imagine a priest's chant, steady and rhythmic, echoing through a temple's hollow heart, an ancient signal not just to the gods, but to hidden technologies. Sound as bridge, sound as key. As you listen to the faint hum in your mind, you realize that ancient Egypt's mysteries weren't only written in stone or painted on walls, they were sung into existence. And perhaps, if you listen closely, those songs still linger. You find yourself drawn to the shadowy heart of ancient Egyptian mathematics, a domain where numbers were not just quantities, but symbols, codes, and sacred keys. Egyptian math, while practical for trade and construction, also carried layers of meaning far beyond simple calculation. Their number system, based on hieroglyphic symbols, was additive yet surprisingly elegant, enabling them to compute fractions, geometry, and even algebraic problems. The Rhind mathematical papyrus and Moscow mathematical papyrus reveal advanced knowledge for their time, solving equations and working with volumes and areas. But you sense there's more lurking beneath these dry texts. The architects of the pyramids encoded precise ratios, harmonics and constants, like the golden ratio and pi, into their structures. This wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate fusion of mathematics and metaphysics. Historians still debate whether the Egyptians discovered these mathematical principles independently or inherited them from earlier civilizations. But what's clear is their use of geometry as a bridge between the earthly and divine. Some fringe theorists argue that Egyptian mathematics contains hidden codes, numerical keys to unlocking spiritual truths or activating technologies. They point to the recurring use of certain numbers, 3, 7, 9, and their multiples, suggesting a numerology woven into architecture and ritual. You imagine priests and scribes not just as accountants, but as cryptographers, weaving mathematics into magical formulas. Numbers become spells, equations become incantations. It's a world where math is not just a language, but a map, a secret code engraved in stone, waiting to be deciphered. And as you ponder the mysteries of Egyptian numbers, you realize the ancient world was fluent not only in spoken word, but in the silent language of numbers. A language that might still speak, if only we listen carefully enough. Water, the Nile, life's eternal artery flowing through Egypt's heart. But water in ancient Egypt was far more than a river. It was a symbol, a ritual, a force woven into the spiritual and architectural fabric of the civilization. Its mysteries ripple through mythology, engineering, and sacred space. Imagine the Nile not just as a provider of irrigation, but as a divine entity, Hapi, the god of the inundation, whose annual floods symbolized death and rebirth, destruction and renewal. The ebb and flow of the river dictated the rhythm of life and death, farming and festival. Historians still debate the full extent of water's mystical role beyond the practical, but water features prominently in temples, ritual baths, and purification rites. Sacred lakes within temple complexes were not ornamental. They were extensions of the cosmic waters of creation, symbolizing the primordial chaos from which life emerged. You consider how the architecture incorporated water channels designed for ceremonial flow, reflecting the belief that water cleansed the body and soul, bridging the material and spiritual. Fringe theories propose water as a conduit for energy, a medium for sound and vibration, or even a storage vessel for cosmic information. Some speculate that temple lakes and pools might have played roles in activating architectural acoustics or resonating with celestial cycles. The symbolism extends to funerary practices, where the journey of the soul is often described as crossing waters or floating on boats, emphasizing transition and transformation. You imagine ancient priests performing water rituals, not just to appease gods, but to activate hidden energies, to cleanse, to prepare travelers for their voyage beyond. Water was both life and mystery, a mirror of the heavens, a bridge between worlds. As you stand by the Nile, watching its slow, inexorable flow, you realize that Egypt's greatest secret may have been the simple power of water to connect, to cleanse, and to transform. And maybe that flow continues, even now, beneath the surface of our understanding. Your journey brings you to the enigmatic solar boats, wooden vessels buried near the pyramids, often in perfect condition despite thousands of years beneath the sands. Their existence has puzzled archaeologists, historians, and dreamers alike. What was their true purpose? Mere funerary offerings, or something far more profound? These boats, especially the famed Khufu ship found near the Great Pyramid, are masterpieces of ancient engineering. Constructed with precise joinery and designed for seaworthiness, they appear ready to sail, not just as symbolic models, but as functional vessels. Yet they were never meant to touch water, buried in pits near royal tombs. Historians still argue whether these boats symbolized the pharaoh's journey with the sun god Ra across the sky, or were intended for a literal voyage in the afterlife. In Egyptian belief, the sun traveled in a celestial bark, battling darkness during the night and rising anew each dawn. You imagine the pharaoh's spirit embarking on this solar voyage, crossing cosmic waters aboard these boats, navigating celestial realms. Fringe theories deepen the mystery, proposing that these solar boats weren't mere symbols, but real interdimensional vehicles, tools for navigating between worlds, or even star systems. Some suggest the boats represent spacecraft, encoded in wood and stone. The precision of their construction, combined with their burial in proximity to cosmic monuments, hints at a ritual technology designed to transport or empower the soul. You smile at the thought. If I were a pharaoh, I'd want the best ride possible for my afterlife journey. As you stand beside these ancient vessels, you sense the boats are more than relics. They are invitations, vessels ready to carry those who dare beyond the veil. And so the mystery sails on. waiting for the next traveller to embark. The desert night deepens around you, the stars above glittering like ancient whispers scattered across the heavens. The sands beneath your feet hold centuries of secrets, echoes of voices, long silent yet ever present. You have travelled through stone and story, myth and mathematics, across time and mystery, carried by the gentle breath of history itself. Now, as your eyelids grow heavy and the world fades, you rest in the arms of this vast enigma called Egypt, a land where every grain of sand, every carved symbol, and every quiet shadow conceals a story waiting to be told. You have glimpsed doors unopened, heard songs unsung, and seen light captured in stone. The mysteries may not all be solved, but they endure, inviting you to dream, to wonder, to wander. Let the rhythmic pulse of the Nile lull you, the soft rustle of palm fronds sing you to sleep, and the distant call of the scarab guide your journey beyond waking. Tonight, Egypt's ancient heart beats alongside yours, a timeless companion in the quiet dark. Rest now, traveller, the stories will wait. And when you wake, the journey begins again.